In the bombshell interview that we're about to play for you guys, Bitcoin billionaire Michael Saylor just made his biggest Bitcoin prediction yet. He said that $23.8 million Bitcoin is coming sooner than you think. So today we're going to actually be having a look at why Michael Saylor has been getting even more bullish recently. And we're also going to be running the maths and having a little look at why this newest prediction confirms that you could retire on not only 0.1 Bitcoin, but you could even do that even sooner than you could ever imagine. So let's jump straight into the clip for you guys that has been breaking the internet this week.
It's going to go from 2 billion to 20 billion to 200 billion to 2 trillion to 20 trillion to 200 trillion. And when it gets to 200 trillion, it'll chop along at plus 20%. To eventually 300, 400, 500 trillion dollars. And where is that capital going to come from? It's going to come from Russian real estate. It's going to come from Chinese private equity. It's going to come from everything in Africa, everything in South America. You have capital flowing from foreign financial and physical assets to Bitcoin. You have capital flowing from 20th century assets to Bitcoin. To the capital is going to flow from the 20th century to the 21st century. It's going to flow from physical to digital. It's going to flow from currency-based derivatives to a digital commodity derivative. So it's already happening.
Before we talk about how quickly this is going to happen, Rob, I want to break the maths down for the people if they might have missed it. Saylor said Bitcoin's going from 20 trillion to 200 trillion to 500 trillion. Now, if you run the numbers, a $500 trillion market cap for Bitcoin, that puts it at $23.8 million per coin. Rob, what are your quick high-level thoughts on that newest prediction from Michael Saylor? I think it might be his biggest yet.
Yeah, $500 trillion is a whole lot of money, and would be bigger than all of fixed income right now, right? I mean, all of bonds in the world are worth 300 trillion. So that's almost double that. But why not? Bitcoin is the perfect collateral. It's the final trade. It is the sponge that will absorb all of the excess liquidity that is coming down the pike as these governments deal with these unpayable debts and must print. So yes, he's even more bullish than he's ever been before, but I guess there's reasons for that.
There certainly are some reasons for that, Rob. We're going to be exposing those reasons for you guys today because you brought it up. Michael Saylor's previous 2024 predictions for Bitcoin weren't quite as bullish as what we're hearing today in 2025. His base case in this 21-year forecast, it used to be $13 million a coin. You guys can see that in the orange numbers. Michael kind of extrapolated out and he said, look, by 2045, I think Bitcoin could take 7% of the globe's assets and it could be a $280 trillion market cap. Again, in this previous prediction, we can kind of see how small Bitcoin is compared to the rest of the world's assets. And in this 21-year forecast, Michael made this little chart based upon his Bitcoin 24 model. And you can see Bitcoin's market cap represented in the top left here of this little graphic that he's got. Bitcoin's representing a $280 trillion market cap. But why has Michael been getting all the more bullish recently? He's talking about a $500 trillion market cap for Bitcoin. Rob and I have kind of been talking about this offline, and maybe, just maybe, we think that Michael might know something that the rest of us aren't privy to. Maybe some private information, if you will, because we do think it's really interesting that Michael's been rubbing shoulders with not only Eric Trump, the son of Donald, but Donald Trump himself, as well as a lot of other members of parliament, as you guys are about to see in the video we're going to play for you guys after I get Rob's thoughts on Michael's changing forecasts and changing predictions about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, in the run up to the election in November, Saylor was talking about discussing things with the incoming administration if they were to be elected. They were elected, and since November, he's been hanging out at Mar-a-Lago, at the White House, on Capitol Hill, invited to the Digital Asset Summit just a couple weeks ago, sitting in a prime position. There was the members of the government with Trump and Sachs, the crypto czar, and the Secretary of Treasury were in the middle, of course, but then right next to him was Brian Armstrong, and then right next to Brian Armstrong was Michael Saylor. So he's got a prime seat at the table. He definitely has the ear of the Trumps. I mean, he's been talking to Eric Trump, obviously, there at Mar-a-Lago. Eric Trump was just brought on onto the board of Metaplanet as a strategic advisor. So the Bitcoin treasury strategy is spreading throughout the world. Eric Trump knows about it well, whether it's from Saylor or from Simon of Metaplanet. They're all talking, and the highest halls of power have Bitcoin on the mind.
Rob, I actually did some digging there in the background while you were talking, because I didn't know that Eric Trump was brought on as an advisor to Metaplanet. As soon as I heard that, my ears and the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand up a little bit, and I started to think, hang on a minute, is there some sort of connection here between Japan and America that's a little bit deeper than most people think? Because that's a little bit interesting that the current sitting president's son of America is an advisor on the board of the Japanese company that not only has the most amount of Bitcoin, but it was the best performing stock in the entire Japanese stock market last year because of their strategic Bitcoin reserve strategy. That's fascinating. But there it is. You guys can see it. We have Eric donning the big bright orange Metaplanet cap with the CEO of Metaplanet himself. That's really interesting.
So yeah, this was a really big week for Metaplanet. Not only did they announce Eric Trump coming on board, but they had their shareholders meeting for the end of the first quarter. It was a packed house. The line was down the hallway to shake hands with Simon, the CEO that you just saw there. They announced that they have reached 3,350 Bitcoin in their Bitcoin treasury, which is just over half the amount that El Salvador has, right? So this is a small company. This was a zombie company. They were a hotel chain without really a mission or purpose. They got on the Bitcoin train last year, became the best performing stock in Japan, all of Asia. They're the best performing stock in all of Asia, arguably the world, according to certain metrics. And now they've got the president's son on their board, right? And they've got people packing the house for shareholder meetings. They've got people reselling the gift bags that they were handing out at this shareholder meeting on the Japanese eBay for over $100, right? I mean, it's become a real craze there for this stock, stock 3350, the same exact amount of Bitcoin that they have in their treasury.
Wow, that's actually that is a very cute coincidence. I didn't know that was how much Bitcoin Metaplanet had at the time of recording. Maybe I want to give the guys a little bit of a visualization of just how crazy this Bitcoin strategy has proved to be from Metaplanet. So I've quickly pulled up the chart here of Metaplanet. As we can see, it's kind of gone parabolic here since they adopted a Bitcoin strategy in early 2024. They adopted it. To put some numbers, yep. I mean, have a look at it. They're up a lazy 4,200%. Peak to trough, so that's from bottom to top. That is a 42x, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine if you had to just put 100 big ones into Metaplanet when they announced their Bitcoin treasury strategy, I suppose you could say. You'd be sitting on 4,500 cool ones. Even at the time of recording, they're up 2,400%, which is just crazy growth.
Yeah, and if you just zoom out, you can see how they were on a path of slow death over a long period of time, right? But this drastically changed their trajectory and has given new life to the stock, of course, and has become this huge sensation over in Japan, just as Japan changed the laws. I mean, they had crazy taxes on Bitcoin. Bitcoin sales for that individual. And I think that's what drove a lot of Japanese investors into Metaplanet to begin with. But now they see that it's on this growth path and want a piece of it.
That's actually another really good point that I hadn't thought of. Japan did have crazy tax laws on Bitcoin. I've pulled it up and it used to be 55%. And that obviously would have contributed a lot to Metaplanet's growth last year. I'm really interested to see how Metaplanet performs moving forwards into the future, because as we can see, Japan just proposed a 35% crypto tax cut, taking that official tax rate from 55% down to 20%. So will this mean that investors might not be as incentivized to buy Metaplanet over just the real Bitcoin? Who knows? That could be a story we explore next week, Rob, in a little bit more detail. Something I want to explore in a little bit more detail at the moment for you guys is some of the other shoulders that Michael has been rubbing shoulders with, so to say. So I want to play you guys a short little segment of this clip here from CNBC, because as you can see, Michael is surrounding himself with some pretty influential politicians.
One of Wall Street's most Our next guest is one of Wall Street's most vocal Bitcoin bulls, recently meeting with members of the House Financial Services Committee to discuss what he calls his digital assets framework to help the U.S. become the global crypto leader. Joining us now in a CNBC exclusive is Strategy co-founder, executive chairman Michael Saylor. Strategy announcing this weekend it delivered a Bitcoin gain of $2.6 billion so far this year. Michael, it's paid to keep buying no matter what. My question is, how much are you involved? Because I know you've met with members of the Trump administration, cabinet, family members, I think the president himself. So are you involved in advising around this strategic crypto reserve?
I've met with a bunch of senators on the Democratic and the Republican side, a bunch of Congress people, a few members of cabinet, a few members of the administration, and anybody that wants to talk. You know me, for the last 4.5 years, I'm willing to talk about Bitcoin to anybody, anywhere in the world, every day.
Yes, and we appreciate that.
I think we all appreciate that, Rob, the fact that Michael's talking to everyone around the world about Bitcoin. But again, that interview is really interesting because, again, Michael's saying the quiet parts out loud. He's talking to some very influential people about Bitcoin. And I think this really maybe could be the thing influencing why his Bitcoin predictions have just been getting bigger and bigger and bigger over time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the man is a literal rocket scientist, right? He's a systems thinker. He sees things out to their logical conclusion. He's a visionary, and once he got bitten by this bug, there was no turning back. And now he's finally able to give his performances, his podcast performances in the Oval Office, right? In the White House. He's able to tell the most powerful people in this country what he thinks. And I mean, it's also interesting to look at his background, right? I mean, he's the son of an Air Force guy, lived in New Zealand on an Air Force base growing up for a little bit. I mean, his office is close to the CIA headquarters. I mean, this guy, there's a lot of connections here to power, to America, the military. And he definitely seems like an American first kind of guy. Larry Lepard, I mean, in his conversation with you, mentioned that Saylor might have ambitions to run for president one day. I mean, this guy definitely thinks that Bitcoin, of course, is the future, but it's also the bedrock of America's financial future as well.
Yeah, that was a really spicy take when Larry said that in our interview that we did post here on the channel, bitcoinnews.com channel. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. We actually have Larry part 2 coming up in the not too distant future, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, I was taken aback when Larry said that. I mean, but it makes a lot of sense. Like, Michael is, like you say, a literal rocket scientist. He's an aeronautical engineer by trade, and he's got a PhD in all sorts of different fields. He's a walking, talking encyclopedia. I know he studied some form of history when he was at university as well, just for shits and giggles by the sounds of it. He was probably just not quite fully intellectually stimulated by being an aeronautical engineer. So he thought, hey, I may as well study history as well. And the guy can pull up analogies from any millennium or century that you might ask him to pull one up from. So he's an incredibly intelligent guy, and I think he would make a great president for America. I mean, don't get me wrong, Trump's a character. He's probably a little bit more of a character than Michael, but I think Michael has other advantages and strengths that Trump might not necessarily have. So yeah, it's a great point you bring up there, Rob, and I think it would make a lot of sense if the Bitcoin billionaire, Michael Saylor, did one day, run for president.
Yeah, I mean, just think of the age. I mean, how old is Saylor right now? Like 55? Look that up. It'd be interesting to know. But I mean, from in 20 years, 2045 is when he thinks that Bitcoin's going to have this crazy valuation, right? I mean, either $280 trillion market cap all the way in his bullish case to a quadrillion dollars, right? So in 20 years, is he going to be what, 75? He's 60 right now. So he's 80. He'll be 80 in 20 years. I mean, Trump is basically 80 right now, right? I think Trump turns 80 this summer. So, I mean, we've definitely shown that you can be that old and be president. I mean, just look what Biden, right? So I think Michael Saylor will have his stuff together better at 80 than Biden will, or probably even Trump. So if we are to look into the future 20 years and Bitcoin is at a 280 trillion to $1 quadrillion market cap, and Michael Saylor has at least 17,000 Bitcoin to his personal stash, plus the 500,000 to maybe 1 million Bitcoin that he is able to acquire from Strategy over the next 5-10 years. I mean, that would place him as the world's richest man, right? I mean, that would be pretty crazy. And if there's one thing that Americans like, they like success stories, they like rich people, and they like to put those people into power. So, I mean, it wouldn't be that far off. If he becomes the world's richest man, could he become president at the age of 75, 80? Who knows?
I think it's a great call. I strongly believe that Michael is going to be the world's richest man, just purely because there is no billionaire who could hypothetically accumulate more Bitcoin than Michael has in his company MicroStrategy. It's getting to the point where it's feasibly impossible. Michael holds 500,000 coins for MicroStrategy, and I believe in the not too distant future, all of the billionaires are going to realize, hang on a minute, the reason why Michael and his company keeps getting richer and richer and richer is because of the Bitcoin that they own. And the only way that the billionaires or these companies can stay richer than Michael Saylor is to effectively buy more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. And I think we're kind of at the tipping point now where there is 6 companies in the entire world who have a bigger treasury than MicroStrategy. So I don't know the exact numbers at the time of recording, but I think MicroStrategy, let's get the exact numbers. Hey, we're on a live stream. We're going to do this live. But from memory, MicroStrategy holds something like $60 to $70 billion worth of Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And there's only 4 to 5 companies that actually have more money on the balance sheet. Okay, that actually have more than $42.48 billion on the balance sheet. But the only company out of those 6 or 7 that have bigger treasuries than MicroStrategy that can actually feasibly buy the Bitcoin without pushback from their shareholders is Mark Zuckerberg. So Zuckerberg has controlling voting power over Metaplanet. Metaplanet is one of the companies that actually has more capital than MicroStrategy. So they're the only company left in the world who can just say, okay, tomorrow we're buying $50 billion worth of Bitcoin and we're going to have more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. And obviously that's a huge hypothetical speculation here, because at what price is Metaplanet going to be able to smash by $50 billion worth of Bitcoin tomorrow? Are they going to be able to get $50 billion of Bitcoin? Who knows? I don't think they're going to be able to get it at $85,000 a coin.
Yeah, I mean, Metaplanet is now a top 10 corporate Bitcoin holder, and they've got 3,350 Bitcoin compared to 500,000 that Strategy has. There's no catching up to that, right? Another interesting thing that we posted today on Bitcoin News X account is, as you can see on that Saylor tracker, right now, Saylor and MicroStrategy are up 25% on their Bitcoin investment for a cool $8.75 billion in profit. However, this website, they tracked if Saylor had purchased the same amount of ETH as he did Bitcoin at each one of those buys, what would he be at right now? He would be negative $9 billion. He'd be down that much. So a perfect mirror image of his success would have been in failure if he had invested in ETH rather than Bitcoin.
I am on our Twitter account right now as we speak, Rob. Here it is. If Saylor had bet on Ethereum instead of Bitcoin, Strategy would be down $9 billion instead of up $9 billion like they are today. That's an incredible chart. First time I've ever seen it.
Yeah, that's why you follow Bitcoin News on Twitter. You'll see charts you've never seen before. Let's go.
Yeah, Rob's the man behind the Bitcoin News Twitter account. Just quietly, he's pumped that up to 223,000 followers. So if you're not following Rob over on the Twitter account, you should definitely be following him, because those are the insights that people need to be aware of, okay? A lot of people think they can outperform Bitcoin by buying these altcoins and these shitcoins. Again, we strongly disagree with that. We are hardcore Bitcoiners. This is why we only align ourselves with Bitcoin-only companies. If you are someone holding a lot of bags of Ethereum, looking to buy some Bitcoin, we'd encourage you to go and buy your Bitcoin at rhinobitcoin.com. We think they're the all-in-one Bitcoin super application, okay? You can do everything you need to do with Bitcoin over on Rhino. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can use the Lightning Network to send Bitcoin anywhere around the world you want to send it with nearly zero fees. As you guys can see, Rhino has a super slick user interface, and we just simply think they're the best option out there for not only seasoned Bitcoiners to use, but also beginners. Again, it does have that really simple user interface. We all know Bitcoin can be confusing. Bitcoin can be complicated at first, which is why we think Rhino is a really great solution. You guys can even get $10 of free Bitcoin if you sign up with Rhino Bitcoin, and if you use a promo code Bitcoin News. That's one word, capital B for Bitcoin, capital N for use, Bitcoin News. It is easier than my pronunciation of it. And you apply that little promo code and you can get $10 of free Bitcoin. So highly recommend you check them out and really buy your Bitcoin and front run these billionaires while you still can. Because as we're about to show you guys in the next little segment we've got for you in this live stream, time is kind of the essence right now. Time to accumulate Bitcoin without friction could really be running out.
There could be a stampede at any second, right? And Bitcoin is known as surprise. Today, we got a bit of a dump, a little bit of a downward surprise, but hey, you never know when Bitcoin's going to run. And of course, it likes to lull people to sleep. Markets are a beast in that regard. They want to take the most amount of money from the most amount of people. So everyone is expecting Bitcoin to run right now, but it'll just do the opposite until you are till you're lulled to sleep, and then we just rips your face off.
I've got the Bitcoin chart up for the guys. Thanks for reminding me, Rob. Oh yeah, we are moving down a little bit. We're back to $83,000. Still a crazy world that we still get the chance to buy Bitcoin for $83,000. What a beautiful opportunity.
But like, just zoom out to a year ago, right? Last April, where were we? At 60?
Oh, last April. Last April. Wow, we were in the 60,000-ish range. And if you go back a couple of more months to the beginning of 2024, we were in $40,000 to start 2024. We've just started 2025 and we're at $83,000, and everybody's worried that Bitcoin's crashed.
Yeah. No, it's important to zoom out. Know what you own. Don't get worried. This thing is literally eating the world, whether it's corporate finance or governments, sovereign wealth funds, or you and your neighbor. Everybody's going to want a piece of this. And there's only 21 million Bitcoin. There's only that amount of private keys that are able to change the ledger and move those UTXOs around. So you want to have control of those private keys so that you are able to move the ledger of what will be the most valuable monetary asset on the planet.
That is a point that just most people don't quite understand, Rob. There is only 21 million Bitcoin. And I think we could be set up to be witnessing a massive supply shock in Bitcoin as we speak, because we have the largest nation state in the world openly declaring that they want to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. And this is happening at a time when 900,000 Bitcoin have just completely evaporated, leaving the exchanges over the past 2 years. But Bitcoin isn't the only hard money that's seen a little bit of a supply shock right now. We can see that silver is seeing things that it hasn't seen in 6 years, as people are absolutely tripping over themselves to accumulate the shiny metal. And based upon the words of the Trump administration that we're about to play for you guys, you're going to see that we might be set up for a little bit of a perfect storm when it comes to a Bitcoin supply shock. So I want to play you the interview that's also been taking the world by storm. This is Bo Hines. He is inside the Donald Trump administration. I want you guys to listen very carefully to what he says in this interview.
Well, you know, we delivered on the president's promises that he made on the campaign trail. You know, the president was adamant about creating the SBR. We wanted to make sure that we did it right in a way that respected Bitcoin for being so unique, and also gave credence to innovation in other spaces of the digital asset world. So, you know, for us here, we look at Bitcoin, it's not a security, it's a commodity. It has intrinsic stored value that's traditionally accepted. It has, as David likes to describe, the immaculate conception. There's no issuer. And, you know, that's why, as you saw in the executive order, we compared this to digital gold. It's something that's imperative for the United States to have, retain, continue to build on. And I think that's worth pointing out that, you know, the way that this is constructed, we talked about ways of acquiring more Bitcoin in budget neutral ways that won't cost the taxpayer a dime. And what I like to say about this president, I think it's high time that our president started accumulating assets for the American people, which is what President Trump is doing, rather than taking it away. And I think that's one thing that we really wanted to make clear in this executive order. And we're looking forward to working with our partners at Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce in order to find those budget neutral ways in which we can acquire more. You know, I've been asked all the time, it's like, how much do you want? And I said, well, that's like asking a country, how much gold do you want, right? I mean, as much as we can get.
America wants as much Bitcoin as they can get. What did you think when you originally saw that interview, Rob?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of impressed with this Bo Hines guy. He sort of came out of nowhere. He was a college quarterback. He was known for being like a college football player, and now he's the head of like digital assets group for the president. It was pretty confusing when we first heard the headlines that he was named to be the head of this group, but now you see him on stage and he's talking about the strategic Bitcoin reserve after the executive order has been signed. And I mean, he's been the most vocal member of this administration, coming out and saying that the government wants as much Bitcoin as possible. Again, this must all be budget neutral accumulation. That means moving money around. They can't use new money or print new money or get Congress to sign some bills, unless, of course, Senator Loomis gets her bill passed. But right now, they've got to find out ways, be creative to not spend any more money, but use money they already have to allocate it towards Bitcoin. And so what was interesting was, of course, we've all talked about the revaluing of the gold certificates that are currently valued at $42 an ounce when they are missing out on the market price today, which is over $3,000 an ounce, which would give the Treasury an additional $800 billion and allow them to go and play and possibly buy some Bitcoin with that markup on the balance sheet. But Senator Cynthia Loomis was at the DC Blockchain Summit on stage with Michael Saylor. That's where we got the clip from the beginning of this live stream. And she said that not only, of course, could we revalue the gold certificates, but America has vast energy resources, and that the government needs to put these towards acquiring Bitcoin. So are we going to see a Department of Defense initiative sort of along the lines of the software thesis, where the military sees having this wall of cybersecurity, having hash force, having hash rate within, of course, the American jurisdiction, but also under the direct control of the government to make sure that they have the ability to move Bitcoin when needed. If this is the neutral reserve asset of the world, if you do not have access to hash rate, it's not really up to you as to when your Bitcoin moves, right? So it does seem as if the government not only knows that they want it for number go up and helping to solve the debt problem, but also in order to have hash rate to be able to mine Bitcoin and also move it when need be.
I just saw a comment in the live chat that just reminded me of what you just said there, Rob, and it kind of reinforces how important it is to take self-custody of your Bitcoin, because not everyone can. Before we get down that rabbit hole, we've got 3,586 of you guys tuning in between Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble, and we'd love to know, how much Bitcoin do you think America is going to buy? I'm really interested by that. We've got a ton of the regulars in the chat. We got Johnny Midas, we got All Night Hider, and then McLovin said this, kind of wild to think that only 210 million people could own 0.1 Bitcoin if it was divided evenly and none was lost. It is pretty wild to think, because what percentage of that is the global population? Is that 0.2% of the global population? Quick maths off the top of my head on a live stream isn't the best, but I believe there's about 8 billion people in the world, and I think 1% of 8 billion would be 80 million. So if only, okay, my quick maths is way out, because 210 million people would be about
2.5%. Yeah, 2.5%.
There you go. Rob saved me there. That's still a very low number in regards to how many people could own 0.1 Bitcoin. And if you guys are late, you didn't see the beginning little portion of this live stream, we did kind of run through the maths, and we did kind of briefly discuss that if Bitcoin's at $23 million a coin, like Michael Saylor is now predicting it could be at, if it's got a $500 trillion market cap, if you've got 10% of a Bitcoin, all of a sudden you're squatting on $2.38 million worth of purchasing power if Bitcoin does do what a multi-billionaire Michael Saylor believes it does. So I believe you probably can retire with $2.4 million today if Bitcoin is at those kind of price levels. So great comment there in the chat, McLovin. It is really crazy to think about that.
Yeah, 21 million is not a lot for a global population. So yeah, it's crazy to think. I mean, is 2.4 million bucks enough to retire today? Could you live off $2.4 million? Could you never work again with $2.4 million?
I couldn't where you're living, Rob, but I certainly could in my neck of the woods. Down here in Peru, 2.4 million big ones will get you a long way. Funny little story. I went to dinner last night with, let's say, 2 friends of mine, and we got everything on the menu at a really nice Peruvian restaurant here in Cusco. It was about 80 bucks for dinner for 3. We got everything. We got like 4 entrees, 4 mains, 2 desserts, and it was like $85. Food was increíble. It was really nice too. So depending on where you are in the world, Rob, obviously answers that question. I'm not sure how far 2.4 million big ones would get you in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, with just inflation and the dollar, I mean, $2.4 million sounds like a lot of money, but then if you got mouths to feed and a roof to keep over your head, college to pay for, it goes quick, man. It goes quick. You gotta make I'm just trying to prove the urgency of accumulating as much Bitcoin as you possibly can right now, while you can still get it for less than $100,000. People are going to look back in a couple of years and be absolutely dumbfounded that people in 2025 have that opportunity.
Absolutely. So I promise the guys, we're not just going on random tangents about how quickly the dollar is losing purchasing power, because it is related to what we were just talking about. People are scrambling to buy Bitcoin. They're scrambling to buy silver, as we saw the lease rates for silver were absolutely skyrocketing, as we showed you guys in the introduction of today's video. We can also see central banks are absolutely scrambling to buy gold right now. And this is all happening at a time when the largest holders of treasuries, Japan and China, are dumping treasuries aggressively in the last quarters to end 2024, as we can see here. We can also see another really cool chart here. This is actually showing us that the net foreign official purchases of US Treasury notes and bonds, 12-month rolling sums, just hit its lowest level since, well, the lowest level in what, a long time is what this chart is showing us. So what I think is really interesting, that we potentially could be seeing a little bit of a changing of the guard here, Rob. Everybody is watching foreigners dump US treasuries. Obviously, they're doing this at a record rate, and we're watching the mad scramble for hard money like gold and silver. We briefly discussed this article a little while ago on the channel. Traders are moving so much gold from the Bank of England that the waiting time has octupled. That's an 8x increase in the amount of time you need to wait to get your hands on the physical gold if you are trying to get it out of the Bank of England, which is obviously why we tell people, buy Bitcoin, buy the real thing. This is why we always tell you guys about Rhino Bitcoin. But what do you think about this supply suffocation we are seeing? And do you think inflation is going to get worse where you're living, Rob, considering we're seeing all of this selling of treasuries around the world?
Yeah, that's one point that biology brings up a lot, that America sort of has this monetary empire, right? The whole world needs dollars in order to transact with each other. And because of that, there's a lot of demand for dollars across the planet. And they were able to increase the money supply by $7 trillion during COVID. And the whole entire world was able to absorb that. And so inflation really took off in 2022, end of 2021. But if the rest of the world did not take dollars, that situation would have been a whole lot worse for Americans and those who do hold dollars. So it's interesting to see, because I mean, there is a lot of privilege with being someone who primarily transacts in dollars, right? The whole entire world needs it. That means there's a lot of demand for it. That keeps its value up. But if we're in a situation where they are dumping treasuries, they don't want dollars, they're moving towards gold, they're moving towards hard money such as Bitcoin, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't think that the dollar is going to just poof and go out of circulation anytime soon, but even just a little loss of purchasing power, as we've seen over the years, it eats away at your standard of living. And soon you're paying double for what you did just a year ago at the grocery store. And that means you have less money in your pocket for other things. So yeah, it does seem as if there's a global race for hard money, and we're seeing it in these lease rates for gold and silver. It's interesting. Bring up the silver chart. Look up silver on TradingView, right? Because during the Great Financial Crisis, right after it, around 2011, it spiked from when the crisis started. Silver was around $14. When it spiked all the way up to $50 in 2011, but then it crashed. Yeah, so if we zoom out a lot on the silver, and it's just been doing nothing literally for over a decade, right? 15 years. It's not even close to hitting an all-time high. So, but it's grinding up. It's grinding up. And I mean, but is silver demonetized, right? I mean, that's why Great Britain was able to take out China in the 1800s, because China ran on a silver standard and Great Britain was on a gold standard, and Great Britain was willing to give them all the silver for their goods. And then they were, when they didn't want that silver anymore, they gave them opium and got them addicted, and they went to war and da 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 da. But yeah, silver has not really been a monetary asset for at least the last 70 years, right? I mean, in the 60s, they stopped putting silver in the coinage in America. And so it's been an industrial use case. Are we seeing the remonetization of silver as it grinds all the way back up from its low of $11 back, I guess, when it crashed in 2020 and is now up to 34? But with the lease rates on those charts, you're showing that, yeah, I mean, there is demand for it, right? I mean, and so even a metal like silver that had been demonetized for at least a century and a half seems to be coming back in favor. And I think it just goes to show you, again, people don't want pieces of paper. They want hard assets. They want sound money. They want gold, silver, Bitcoin.
Absolutely. That's a very, very nice note to kind of leave that little sound money rabbit hole on, because that's exactly true. People want hard money, and they want it like never before. I don't think I've ever seen demand for hard money at the rates that we've been seeing it. We even did a video recently talking about why there is this massive race for hard money. If you guys want to watch that video, I'm going to put a link to that video somewhere around there. But again, I think this is super interesting that we are watching at the same time we're watching foreigners dump treasuries and dump bonds at record rates. We're kind of seeing a little bit of a backflip, Rob, that I think is really, really interesting. We're beginning to see maybe the petrodollar system kind of come back together, because literally this week, I believe we might have just seen a $2 trillion America and Middle Eastern partnership reignite itself. Now, I know how crazy that sounds, but leaders from the UAE and Saudi Arabia have been meeting with not only Donald Trump, but here we have the brother of the president of the UAE meeting with David Sachs. And we can see there are some very influential hands being shaken here by the leaders of America and the leaders of the Middle East. And what we finally come to find out is that the UAE has invested $1.4 trillion into America and American companies, and Saudi Arabia has agreed to invest $600 billion into America and American companies. So I want to kind of ask the question, is the Middle East kind of realigning with America now that Donald Trump is the official leader? Because over the past 2.5 years, while Biden was at the helm, who remembers all the headlines? Saudi Arabia said, I want to join BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa coalition. We even saw Saudi Arabia and lots of other Middle Eastern countries say for the first time, I will actually accept Chinese yuan, Russian rubles for my oil. I will no longer accept only US dollars for my oil. So what did you think about the recent headlines here of the US leaders meeting with the leaders from the Middle East, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Middle East for a reason. It's the middle point of the world. It's where all the trade routes interact. And of course, it is the hotbed of oil, right? Energy that this whole entire planet depends on or runs on. So it is sort of the prize, and those who are able to hold their influence and sway over it sort of can hold their sway over the world, because not only is it the oil and energy there, but it is also the trade routes in the sense of the Suez Canal, right? The connection between the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean, the way that China can get their goods from China to Europe, and Europe can get out to the rest of the world. It's all right there. And so, I mean, of course, there's lots of interesting things going on in the Middle East right now. Israel is currently doing military operations in Palestine, and that has not ended. But there's the chess pieces are moving, right? And as you were saying, the BRICS coalition had tried to move in, and I mean, Saudi Arabia did join BRICS recently, right? But the new administration and Trump, it does seem as if there's more headway coming that way. So, I mean, the Middle Eastern countries could also just be like the hot girl at the prom, right? Like everybody wants a piece of them, and they'll just take everything from everybody because everybody's throwing themselves at them. So it's definitely an interesting situation. The Middle East is just as important as ever. I mean, it was a disastrous 4 years really under Biden, where of course the Israel-Palestine conflict broke out, the horrible withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was just an absolute mess, and Iraq just literally falling into the hands of China. It really couldn't have not have gone worse for Biden in the Middle East. But now it's a new administration, a new time, a new focus on it, and these guys are pouring a lot of money into the U.S. it seems, and I think that's part of the goal of these tariffs, and is to drive that investment on American shores, bring back manufacturing, and have this American renaissance. Will Trump have enough time and enough political will to see it through? I don't know. If the markets keep dropping, I don't know how long he can keep it up, but could be. In the end, I think he has what's best for America at mind, but we'll see if he can actually do it. It's a tall order.
Absolutely, it is. Especially when we're seeing all of these countries kind of break partnerships and break ranks with America. This is a really cool little visualization that's showing us that 6 members joined BRICS: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. So again, look at those Middle Eastern giants there. The ones we're talking about today, the UAE and Saudi Arabia. They are saying, yep, we're going to join with countries that are not aligned with what the West is doing. That is the entire idea of the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They've been doing their own thing for a very long time. And more recently, in the past year or two, they've seen a lot of other interests from a lot of other countries wanting to partner with them and not align with the West. So I do think it's really interesting. We are starting to see what looks to be a little bit of a pivot. And again, it's not just a pivot, but it's who's doing the pivoting. It's this gentleman, the brother of the president of the UAE. They call him the spy sheik, taking the AI world by storm. Look, these guys have a ton of money to spend. And what's really interesting is this gentleman, the spy sheik, he's also the UAE's national security advisor, which is a little bit interesting. He's not just the brother of the president, but he is a very important gentleman. And as we can see, he's not just met with the crypto czar, David Sachs, but he also met with the big dog himself, Donald Trump. So again, this is interesting. Are we beginning to see America realign with the Middle East after what has been 2 years worth of, let's just call it what it is, a fracturing of the petrodollar system? Who knows? Maybe we're going to do that.
Yeah, I think Sachs is making moves. It's all power, right? It's geopolitics is a chess game, and it is being upended right now. I think America's leadership knew that things needed to change from the path that they were on, and just throwing money at problems like Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Palestine was not going to work out in their favor. They needed to shift things up, and this is part of that shifting.
Absolutely. And the world looks as if it's continuing to converge on sound money. While we are talking about the UAE and Saudi Arabia, we should mention the fact that, hey, they have some of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. 2 of the bigger slices on this pizza down here, 3 of them are Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. So this is looking at the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. We can see Norway's got a $1.7 trillion giant, but then we've got the UAE with the 4th biggest sovereign wealth fund, $1.1 trillion. We got Kuwait with a $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, and we've got Saudi Arabia, a $925 billion sovereign wealth fund. Now, this is a little bit interesting because America, Donald Trump recently, did he sign an executive order, Rob, to stand up a sovereign wealth fund in America?
The executive order is to investigate it, right? So they've got 6 months to put the plan together. That is Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, former CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, who is the custodian of Tether's treasury bills, as well as a large Bitcoin holder himself. So yeah, there's the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which would have store the Bitcoin that the government already has. And then there's a question whether the sovereign wealth fund that Howard Lutnick is establishing could go out and buy Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, what I find interesting again about the UAE committing $2 trillion the Middle Eastern giants committing $2 trillion to invest into America, 1.4 of that coming from the UAE, is that America is the largest Bitcoin mining superpower of the world. I've got the Bitcoin mining by country visualization on the screen here for you guys. The darker the colors shows which countries have the most hash power. There's a ton of it in the southern parts of the USA. And if we have a look at it from an overall basis, we can see America has 37.8% of the global Bitcoin hash rate. Who's number 2 on the list? China. It's a little bit interesting. Kazakhstan number 3 there with 13%. But the question here is that, yes, we know that Saudi Arabia and these Middle Eastern countries have already heavily invested into Bitcoin. Dubai recently passed a law announcing that their citizens in the city are allowed to get paid their wages in Bitcoin. Obviously, there's no taxes on Bitcoin in Dubai, which is why it's a little bit of a quote unquote crypto hotspot. We can also see Saudi Arabia's $620 billion sovereign wealth fund has backed a ton of crypto-friendly VCs. So we know that the Middle East has been investing into Bitcoin for a while. I'm really interested what is going to be a part of this, new $2 trillion framework that's being invested into America. Is the Middle East investing into Bitcoin mining companies? Certainly a possibility. What are your thoughts on this whole topic, Rob?
Well, one thing that's common between Bitcoin mining and AI is power consumption, right? That is absolutely, there's just not enough power to run all the data centers that they have planned to come online over the next decade or so. And so that's just the fundamental thing that needs to be solved here. It's interesting. I mean, if you look at the miners over the last year, they've been horrible stocks, right? I mean, the stocks have performed really poorly since the halving last April, about a year ago. I mean, of course, the amount of Bitcoin mined per day gets cut in half, and that means that it gets twice as hard for them to create a profit. So Bitcoin miners have had a really hard time in America and pretty much around the world. You need the cheapest electricity possible to make any kind of money in Bitcoin mining right now. And that's, of course, why you see it in the most sort of exotic places around the world, right? Using hydroelectric power from rivers in Zambia, or running off of cheap coal in China. It's really, it's where you find electricity the cheapest is where you're going to find Bitcoin mining, and that energy is the common tie between Bitcoin mining and this AI infrastructure that will be built out in mass over the next 10 years.
Yeah, they're two very interesting technologies that kind of work hand in hand. That is for sure. I think Martin here has a great comment in the chat. The EU seems to be not only bashing and banning technologies like Bitcoin, but also useful technologies like nuclear energy, and just energy consumption is just regarded as being bad. Martin says here, real hard money like gold, silver, and Bitcoin are going to be king. Tend to agree with that. That is a great point. Just scanning the chat here, we have 4,654 of you guys live watching Rob and I talk about Bitcoin and boring macroeconomic topics on a Friday afternoon here. So thanks again for everyone tuning in. We'd love your thoughts on everything we've discussed so far. And if you did join the stream late, you can rewind and watch from the beginning of the stream. I think that's easiest to do on YouTube. So check us out over there.
I think one thing we gotta just talk on real quick before we head out of here is GameStop, dude. GameStop is buying Bitcoin. GameStop is issuing $1.3 billion in convertible notes, taking on debt in order to acquire Bitcoin. This was a meme that has been talked about for over a year plus. Like, what is GameStop going to do with the 4.6 billion dollars that it's sitting in its treasury? It's obviously just getting eroded by inflation. They should pull a Michael Saylor. And we've seen the hints over the last couple of weeks, month. Ryan Cohen, CEO of GameStop, pictured with Michael Saylor. We saw Ryan Cohen go ahead and only follow two people on X, one being GameStop, of course, the other one being Bitcoin Magazine. This was prior to the announcement. And then this week they came out, shocked the world, and announced a Bitcoin treasury strategy as well. In the same week, came out and said that they're going to do this $1.3 billion convertible note offering. So, I mean, this is game theory as well, right? I mean, this is uniting two of the most fervent retail investor bases in the world, GameStop holders, Bitcoiners. And I mean, it's been a down week in the markets for more of macro reasons, but this could be really quite the signal, the shot across the bow that tells the rest of corporate America that this is not just some fringe thing for companies like Strategy or MetaPlanet, but no, if you're a big retail name, you want to get some life behind your stock, you got to get some Bitcoin.
It's a great point. I'm shocked that the price of GameStop didn't do a ton. It did spike a little bit on the announcement. If we really zoom in here on a daily and get a little bit granular, we did spike from $22 to $29. And now we've kind of retraced all of those gains. And as you say, Rob, there could be other reasons for why GameStop has kind of been trending sideways here since 2021, since they had that massive big blow off top. And that's obviously right now the markets are selling off, which could be influencing this more recent red candle for GameStop. But again, it's like you say, it's huge. GameStop has $5 billion on the balance sheet. We recently had the pleasure of interviewing I'm going to call him a GME expert, Peruvian bull. He has well over 100,000 followers on Twitter, and he began gaining notoriety by talking about GameStop. And like you say, and like Peruvians said, they have been, a lot of people have been looking at why they've been raising so much capital over the past 4 years since they had this big blow off top in 2021. That really did literally break the markets. A lot of people were speculating, what are they going to be doing with that cash? We can kind of see since this 2021 parabola, they've really been trending sideways and down, okay? And throughout every single one of these big pumps and spikes you see on the chart, Ryan Cohen and GME have been raising billions of dollars of capital. Every single time the stock's pumped a little bit, they've been raising capital, sitting on their cash. And now they've deployed about 20% of that cash and said, we're going to use $1.3 billion to accumulate Bitcoin. I'd be really interested.
That's the thing. They're not deploying that cash yet. They're using this convertible notes, this debt to buy the Bitcoin, not using the cash yet. They have not announced how they would use the cash. So despite the fact they have 4.7, almost $5 billion sitting in the treasury, they're going out and adding another $1.3 billion by offering this debt so that they can start their Bitcoin accumulation with that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. They've still got $5 billion they can deploy.
Yes. And what's also interesting, I mean, of course, in January 2021, GameStop was the talk of the world. It almost broke the stock market, right? The short squeeze, the hedge funds had a crazy amount of short interest on this one stock. The retail investors banded together. They kept buying it, forcing a short squeeze, forcing the hedge funds to buy up the stock, and just sent it parabolic, as you saw on the chart. And what's also interesting is that since they announced this $1.3 billion debt offering, the shorts are back. I brought up a chart of that on the Bitcoin news page yesterday that it went vertical, the amount of short interest on GameStop yesterday. And it's only second highest compared to the 2021 short squeeze. And so there is some dealing with the convertible bond offering with these short sellers. They often, those who buy the convertible notes, they also take out short interest on the stock as well. And I'm not an expert in this, but it's obvious to see that this does happen with MicroStrategy when they offer a convertible note, as well as with GME when they've done it. But yeah, the short interest is back, and could that lead to another short squeeze like we saw in 2021? And now fueled with Bitcoin rocket sauce.
That's the big question we might answer next week. With all that said, thank you so much to the 4,800 people joining us live.